The Great Silence was the first gift from the Vord. Before their arrival, humanity screamed. It was a species defined by its noise, the cacophony of politics, the clamor of markets, the incessant shriek of war and want and ambition. Our signals bled into the void, chaotic testament to a race perpetually at odds with itself. Then the Vord came, not in warships spitting fire, but in crystalline vessels that sang a silent, geometric song as they settled into orbit over every major city on Earth and its fledgling colonies. They didn't make demands, they made offers. They offered unity. They offered peace. They offered an end to the noise. And humanity, weary of its own screaming, accepted. The Vord were architects of tranquility. Their philosophy built on the elegant principle of essential form. And they believed that every species had a perfect, optimal state, a final evolutionary blueprint, and that all the chaos of existence, conflict, disease, dissent was merely the friction of a species grinding against its own imperfections. Their gift was to eliminate that friction. They smoothed the jagged edges of human nature with a gentle, irresistible pressure. Famine ended overnight as Vord bioformers restructured global agriculture. War became a forgotten concept. The very neurological impulses for aggression subtly repatterned by the ambient frequencies humming from their orbital spires. Politics dissolved into the quiet efficiency of the Vord administrative nexus, a dispassionate intelligence that managed planetary resources with a wisdom humanity had never possessed. The world became clean, orderly, and breathtakingly quiet. It was a gilded cage, and most of humanity never even saw the bars. But in the shadowed corners of the New World, in the places the Vord's light didn't fully reach, lived the divergents. They were the artists, the rebels, the black market biohackers, the gene splicers, and the flesh sculptors who saw the human form not as a blueprint to be perfected, but as a canvas for chaotic expression. Before the Vord, they had been a subculture. Now, they were a heresy. Anya Volkov, who went by the street handle Nyx, was one of them. She was a gene splicer, and her medium was the living body. She didn't work with chrome and wire like the old-world cyberpunks. She worked with recombinant DNA, tailored retroviruses, and programmable stem cells. In her hidden workshop in the underlevels of the Ares B colony on Mars, a place the Vord's pacification field was weakest, she painted with the palette of life itself. Ornate. She could weave shimmering, bioluminescent patterns into a client's skin that pulsed with their heartbeat. Craft subdermal plating from chitinous polymers for miners who needed extra protection. Or even grant a singer a second set of vocal cords capable of producing harmonies no single human throat was meant to create. Her work was illegal, not because it was dangerous, but because it was unnecessary. It was an expression of individuality in a society that was rapidly forgetting the word. It was noise. Her latest client was a freighter pilot named Kalen, a man whose face was a road map of busted capillaries and whose knuckles were permanently swollen. He wanted wings, not functional ones for flight. The Vord had made personal transport so efficient that such a thing was a useless fantasy, but ornamental ones. He wanted wings of bone and leather, modeled after the extinct Terran bats he'd seen in old archives, that would unfurl from his shoulder blades. It was an absurd, glorious, and deeply human request. "They'll see them," Nyx warned, her voice a low rasp. She was calibrating the gene sequencer, its holographic interface casting a soft blue glow on her own modified features. Her eyes, a custom job from her youth, were a liquid silver that could polarize at will, filtering out the harsh Martian sunlight. The compliance patrols, they'll mark you for resequencing. Kaylin just grunted, strapped to the bio-cradle in the center of her lab. Let 'em. I spent 50 years hauling ore from the belt to this red rock. I saw things out there. Kid, real things. Nebulae that looked like gods sleeping. Comets trailing dust older than our sun. I want to carry a piece of that wildness on me. A reminder of what we were before we got so quiet. Nyx understood. That same restlessness was what drove her own art. It was a rebellion whispered in the language of DNA. She inserted the final viral vector into the cradle's auto-injector. "This will feel strange," she said. "Your body will be rewriting its own history. Sleep. When you wake up, you'll be different." The procedure was a success. Kaylin left her workshop 2 days later, a grim smile on his face as he tested the pull of new muscles. The magnificent, useless appendages folded beneath a heavy coat. The payment, a handful of rare earth isotopes that the Vord currency system couldn't track, would keep her lab running for another cycle. But his visit left her with a gnawing unease. The Vord's quiet oppression was becoming less quiet. The resequencing she'd mentioned was their solution for divergence. Those who showed signs of genetic instability or behavioral friction, a spectrum that included everything from violent crime to simply painting a mural on a public wall, were taken to pristine white clinics. They returned days later, calm and content. The fire in their eyes was gone. Their personalities sanded down to a placid, agreeable neutrality. They were files restored to factory settings. More and more people were being taken, and the criteria for what constituted friction were becoming tighter every day. The alert came a week later, not through any official channel, but through the shadow net her community of divergence used to communicate. It was a single, repeating data pulse, a silent scream in the digital dark, a lily wilting. It was their code for a raid, a purge. Compliance was coming. Nyx's blood ran cold. She began shutting down her lab with practice speed, her movements economical and precise. Sequencers were wiped, samples were flash incinerated, and the bio-cradle was folded into a nondescript cargo container. She grabbed her go-bag, a worn satchel containing a portable DNA scanner, a few custom viral counteragents, and a holdout kinetic pistol she prayed she'd never have to use. She had to warn the others. Her first stop was a hydroponics bay in a lower sector, run by a botanist named Alara who specialized in psychoactive flora, another form of Vord-banned chaos. Nyx found the bay in ruins. The delicate, spiraling plants were torn from their beds, their leaves crushed under the heavy tread of armored boots. Alara was gone. The only things left were the faint smell of ozone from Vord energy weapons and a single, perfect white lily placed in the center of the floor, the calling card of a compliance primus, a Vord human hybrid who led the purges. Panic, a raw and primal emotion the Vord sought to eliminate, seized her. She fled, her silver eyes scanning the corridors, seeing the signs everywhere now that she was looking for them. Small squads of compliance officers, their faces hidden behind reflective white helmets, moved with silent purpose. They weren't the clumsy human police of the old world. They were fluid, graceful, and utterly implacable. They were shepherds culling the flock. She made for the spaceport, her mind racing. There was nowhere safe on Mars. Not anymore. Earth was the heart of the Vord's power. A paradise prison. Her only hope was the outer belt, the so-called Shatter Belt, a chaotic mess of asteroid mining colonies, pirate anchorages by Chetpa, and derelict stations that the Vord had deemed too chaotic and resource-poor to be worth pacifying. It was the last bastion of noise in the solar system, a place where humanity's beautiful, terrible flaws were still allowed to fester. It was a long shot. Getting off-world required Vord-approved travel authorization, and her biometrics were likely already flagged. She found her way to Hangar Bay 7, a greasy, forgotten corner of the port that serviced the garbage haulers and ore freighters, the grimy arteries of the system that the Vord preferred to ignore. Here, she found Jax. He was a cyborg, an old-world relic whose body was a clunky, asymmetrical mess of pistons, wiring, and mismatched plating. He was a walking museum of obsolete technology, and for that reason, the Vord's elegant systems had trouble categorizing him. He was a glitch they hadn't bothered to patch. "They're sweeping the colony," Old Man Nick said, sliding into the shadows beside his maintenance nook. "Purge. I need a ride out. Now." Jax didn't look up from the plasma conduit he was welding. His optical sensor, a dull red photoreceptor, glowed faintly. "Everyone needs a ride out today. Splicer, Shatterbelt-bound freighter, the Vagrant, leaves in 20 minutes. Captain's a hard-ass named Core. He's taking on essential cargo only." He finally turned, his face a patchwork of scarred flesh and tarnished metal. "He owes me a favor, but he won't take a passenger. Cargo, he'll take." He gestured with his welding torch toward a row of stasis pods. "You willing to travel as freight?" The thought of being locked in a cold, black box for the week-long journey was terrifying, but it was better than the alternative. The sterile white room of a resequencing clinic was a fate worse than death. It was the death of the self. "Do it," she said, her voice firm. As Jax prepped a pod, overriding the manifest with his back-channel access codes, a distant alarm began to chime through the hangar. It was a soft, melodic tone, nothing like the jarring klaxons of the past, but it carried a far more sinister weight. The lockdown was beginning. "Time to go," Jax grunted, gesturing her into the pod. The interior was cramped, smelling of sanitizer and cold metal. "I've set the pod to a light sleep cycle. You'll be aware, but your body will be in metabolic suspension, less likely to go crazy." Before the lid hissed shut, plunging her into darkness, Jax leaned in. "One more thing. Core is a bastard, but he's predictable. The belt is not. Out there, they don't just take your individuality, Splicer. They feast on it. Be careful who you trust." The lid sealed, and a profound cold seeped into her bones. A faint prick in her neck, and the world dissolved into a gray, timeless haze. She was cargo, a fugitive piece of art being smuggled out of the silent museum, bound for the last scrap of wilderness left in the system. She drifted in and out of a twilight consciousness, the passage of time marked only by the low thrum of the ship's engines vibrating through the pod's shell. She was aware of the ship undocking, of the slight lurch as it broke from Mars's gravity, and the strange, stomach-dropping sensation of it entering the jump point for the belt. She dreamed of Kalen's bat wings, of Ilara's crushed flowers, of the placid, empty eyes of the resequenced. She dreamt of a universe of suffocating silence. When the pod finally hissed open, the sudden light was blinding. The air was thick with the smell of recycled oxygen, sweat, and machine oil. A large, gruff figure loomed over her, his face obscured by the glare of an overhead light. Jax called in his chit. The man growled. His voice was like rocks grinding together. Said I was hauling volatile gene stock. Didn't say it could walk. This was Captain Core. He was built like the freighter he flew, wide and functional, with a face that looked like it had been used to stop a few bar fights. He tossed a drab gray jumpsuit at her. "Get dressed, and stay out of my way. We're docking at a rock called Palace Grave in 2 hours. From there, you're on your own. Nix climbed out of the pod, her limbs stiff and weak. She looked around the cargo bay. It was a chaotic mess of crates, conduits, and machinery, all strapped down with heavy magnetic clamps. It was the antithesis of the clean, orderly world she had just fled. It was beautiful. "Thank you," she said. Core just grunted. "Don't thank me. Thank Jax. I'm just clearing a debt. Now get out of my cargo bay." As she made her way to the small crew quarters, she passed a viewport. She stopped, mesmerized. Outside was the shatter belt. It wasn't the neat, predictable orbits of the inner planets. It was a swirling, majestic chaos of rock and ice. Asteroids the size of cities tumbled slowly through the void, their surfaces glittering with mineral deposits. Tiny ships, little more than engines strapped to cockpits, darted between them like insects. In the distance, she could see Palace Grave. It wasn't a colony built on a rock. It was a station built into one. Lights glowed from deep within fissures and craters, connected by a spiderweb of pressurized tunnels and external docking clamps. It looked like a wound in the darkness, infected with light and life. She was changing into the jumpsuit when she felt it. A faint, almost imperceptible hum that resonated deep in her bones. It was the Vord's pacification frequency, the song of their silent oppression. But it wasn't coming from the ship. It was coming from outside. She rushed back to the viewport, her silver eyes scanning the asteroid field. There, nestled in the shadow of a larger asteroid, was a Vord ship. It wasn't one of the grand, crystalline vessels that orbited Earth. It was small, sleek, and predatory. A scout ship painted a stark, sterile white. It was a wolf slipping into the sheepfold. Core's voice boomed over the ship's intercom. "All hands. Brace for inspection. Vord Compliance Patrol. Standard customs check." A cold dread washed over Nix. It wasn't a random patrol. It couldn't be. They had tracked her. They were extending their great silence into the last pocket of noise. She was cornered. There was nowhere left to run. The freighter shuddered as a docking clamp latched onto its hull. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoed from the airlock. Nix backed away from the viewport, her hand instinctively going to the kinetic pistol tucked into the small of her back. She had spent her life as an artist, a creator. But as the airlock door began to cycle open, she realized that in this new, silent war, survival would require her to become something else entirely. She would have to become a weapon. The age of quiet was over. The noise was about to begin. The airlock door slid open with a sigh, not a clang. Vord technology was always silent. 3 figures stood in the frame, silhouetted against the harsh light of the docking tube. They were compliance officers, clad in form-fitting white armor that seemed more grown than forged, their movements possessing a liquid grace that was deeply unsettling. Between them stood the Primus. He was taller than the others, his armor a pearlescent white that shifted in the light. He removed his helmet, and the sight was a calculated violation of nature. He was human, but perfectly so. Symmetrical features, flawless skin, and eyes the color of a winter sky, calm, clear, and utterly devoid of warmth. He held a single, perfect white lily in one hand. "Anya Volkov," the Primus said. His voice was not projected, yet it filled the space. A resonant baritone that bypassed the ears and seemed to vibrate directly in the bones. "Your expression is inefficient. Your heart rate is elevated. The Vord offer tranquility. Why do you resist it?" Core stepped forward, his heavy form a stark contrast to the Primus's elegance. "This is my ship, Vagrant. We're hauling industrial scrap. There's no one by that name aboard. The Primus's gaze drifted to Core, and for a moment, the captain flinched as if struck. Deception is a form of friction. Captain Core, it is a symptom of a disorderly mind. We can correct that. He took a step into the cargo bay, his pristine boots making no sound on the grimy deck plating. His eyes scanned the room and then, with unnerving accuracy, locked directly onto Nyx. There you are. The little spark of chaos. You have corrupted your own form, and you assist others in their corruption. This cannot be permitted. Nyx's mind raced, all thoughts of a simple firefight evaporating. The kinetic pistol in her bag felt like a child's toy. To fight them with force was to play a game they had already perfected, but they were biological. The Primus, for all his perfection, was still flesh and blood, and flesh was her canvas. Her hand slipped into her go bag, fingers closing around a small and pressurized vial. It was a counter agent she'd designed for a client who'd had a disastrous encounter with a black market nerve scrambler. It was meant to shock the nervous system back into a baseline state. But what if there was no baseline to return to? What if you introduced it into a system already perfectly balanced chaos? She twisted the cap, activating the aerosolizer. Your idea of perfection is a cage, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She needed to buy a few seconds for the agent to prime. The Primus tilted his head, a gesture of mild curiosity. A cage is only a cage to that which does not understand its purpose, and a skeleton is a cage for the organs. A planet's gravity is a cage for its atmosphere. Structure is not imprisonment, it is sanity. He took another step, raising the lily as if in offering. Come, we will smooth your jagged edges. We will give you peace. The vial in her hand hissed, a sound only she could hear. I like my edges, she whispered, and threw it. The vial shattered on the deck at the Primus's feet, releasing a near-invisible mist. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The Primus looked down at the shattered glass, a flicker of something annoyance, confusion crossing his perfect face. Then the counter-agent hit his nervous system. He didn't scream. The Vord had likely edited that impulse out of him, but his body betrayed him. His limbs began to twitch, his muscles firing in random, spastic contractions. His perfect face contorted, one eye pulling wide while the other clamped shut. The two officers beside him reacted instantly, raising their energy rifles, but they too had inhaled the mist. One of them began to laugh, a high, unhinged sound, while firing his weapon randomly into the ceiling. The other simply collapsed, his body vibrating on the floor as every synapse in his brain fired at once. It was a symphony of neurological chaos. The Primus staggered, dropping the lily. He clutched his head, a low groan escaping his lips as his own perfectly ordered biology turned against him. Core stared, his jaw agape, at the scene of writhing, twitching perfection. Nyx didn't hesitate. The airlock. Now she yelled, grabbing his arm. The captain, shocked back into action, slammed a heavy fist onto the emergency release panel for the docking clamp. A klaxon. A real, ugly, human-made klaxon blared through the ship. The vagrant bucked as the magnetic locks disengaged. Nyx scrambled through the still-open airlock into the docking tube that connected to Palace Grave. Core right behind her. You're more trouble than you're worth. Splicer, he bellowed as they ran. That's a Vord Primus. They'll tear this whole rock apart looking for you. Then I'd suggest you get gone. She shot back, not breaking stride. They reached the station-side hatch, and Core slammed it shut, sealing them inside Palace Grave just as the docking tube retracted with a screech of tortured metal. Through the thick viewport, Nick saw the vagrant fire its thrusters, a clumsy beast fleeing a wounded predator. The Vord's scout ship remained motionless, a silent, white promise of retribution. The moment the inner door opened, the noise hit her like a physical blow. Palace Grave was everything the Vord-controlled worlds were not. The air was a thick soup of smells, spicy food, ozone from exposed wiring, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of welding. The corridor was a riot of color, every surface covered in graffiti that glowed, moved, and sometimes screamed. People thronged the passageway, a vibrant, clashing mob of humanity at its most extreme. A man with skin like polished chrome argued with a woman whose hair was a cascade of living, phosphorescent fungi. A group of miners, their bodies thickened with subdermal plating, laughed loudly, their voices booming in the enclosed space. Music, 3 or 4 different kinds, bled from open doorways. It was overwhelming, chaotic, and the most beautiful thing Nyx had ever seen. This was the culture she belonged to, the glorious, messy, imperfect noise that the Vord wanted to erase. She pulled up the hood of her jumpsuit, trying to blend in, but her own altered eyes and the subtle grace of her movements, a stark contrast to the lumbering gait of the augmented miners, marked her as an outsider. She needed to find an anchor in this storm, a point of contact. Jax had given her a name, a coded address for a man named Silas, a figure who supposedly held considerable sway in the station's underworld. Silas was a flesh sculptor, an artist whose prestige and infamy far exceeded her own. Finding his studio was a journey into the station's heart. She descended through levels carved from raw asteroid rock, past gambling dens where bets were placed on insect fights, through markets selling everything from stolen Vord tech to vials of custom-tailored emotions. Silas's studio was in the lowest level, in a cavernous space that had once been a mining excavation site. The entrance was guarded by 2 figures who seemed more sculpture than human, their bodies elongated and reformed into unsettling, beautiful shapes that defied anatomy. They parted without a word, granting her entrance. The cavern was a gallery of living art, bodies, suspended in nutrient tanks or posed on pedestals, were Silas's masterpieces. He had sculpted muscle into intricate, flowing patterns, woven bone into delicate lattices, and crafted skin into textures ranging from iridescent scales to faceted crystal. It was breathtaking and terrifying. A figure emerged from the shadows. He was old, his face a mask of wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. Unlike his creations, his own body seemed largely unmodified, except for his hands. They were long, impossibly delicate, with an extra joint in each finger, tools of a master craftsman. "Jack sent word you were coming," Silas said, his voice a dry whisper. "He said you were a painter. I see now he meant it literally. You paint with the source code itself. Impressive. For a colonial." He circled her, his unnerving hands tracing the air around her as if measuring her form. "But you bring trouble. I can smell it on you. The sterile scent of Vord. It clashes with the aesthetic of this place." Nyx stood her ground. "A Vord Primus is docked at your station." "He's hunting me. They've started a purge." "Silas, they're coming for all of us. For the Divergence. For anyone who makes noise." Silas stopped, his expression unreadable. "The Vord have always ignored the belt. We are beneath their notice. Inefficient, messy, a statistical write-off. Not anymore." Nyx insisted. "I attacked one of them, humiliated him. They won't let that stand. They will bring their silence here." Silas was quiet for a long moment, studying one of his living sculptures, a woman whose entire back had been transformed into a pair of closed, feathered wings made of sculpted bone and muscle. Individuality, my dear girl, is a solitary pursuit. We are a collection of artists here, not an army. We do not fight. We create. And we survive by not drawing attention. Your survival is an illusion, Nyx countered, her voice rising with passion. They will resequence you. They will turn your living statues into bland, functional servitors and call it perfection. They will sand you down until nothing is left but a smooth, quiet, useless pebble. Her words echoed in the vast cavern. Before Silas could respond, a voice echoed from every speaker in the studio, a calm, resonant baritone that chilled Nyx to the bone. It was the Primus. He was broadcasting to the entire station. Greetings, residents of Palace Grave. The voice began, smooth as silk. I am Primus Lacroix of the Vord Compliance Service, an unstable element, a genetic deviant known as Anya Volkov, has sought refuge among you. She is a purveyor of chaos, a carcinogen in the body of humanity. A holographic image of Nyx flickered into existence in the center of the cavern, a security still from the Martian spaceport. Her presence introduces friction into your environment. It invites our scrutiny. This need not be a complicated affair. Surrender her to us, and the Vord will consider your habitat, quarantined, but autonomous. We will depart, and you may return to your baby art. The voice paused, letting the offer sink in. Refuse, and we will be forced to sterilize the infection. The choice is yours. You have one cycle. The broadcast ended, plunging the studio back into silence. The eyes of Silas's guards were now on her, cold and calculating. Every artist, every smuggler, every miner on the station was now a potential bounty hunter. She was trapped. Silas finally turned to her, his face grim. You have made yourself into a liability, girl. You have brought the Void's white angels to our door. He looked at his hands, the exquisite, multi-jointed fingers flexing slowly. But you were right about one thing. My work is not quiet. He looked up, and for the first time, Nyx saw a flicker of fire in his ancient eyes, a spark of the same rebellious energy that drove her. The Primus made a mistake, Silas whispered. He assumed we are afraid of him. We are not. We are afraid of his silence. He gestured to the depths of his studio. Come. If you're to be the spark that starts a fire, you will need to be properly forged. We must understand how to fight an enemy that believes it is our savior. Nyx followed him into the darkness, the weight of 1,000,000 hostile eyes pressing in on her from outside the studio walls. She was no longer just a fugitive. She was a symbol, a catalyst. Primus Lacroix thought he was hunting a single woman. He was about to find out he had just declared war on every beautiful, chaotic, and gloriously imperfect monster in the Shatterbelt. Silas's studio became the eye of the storm. Outside, the vibrant chaos of Palace Grave was curdling into a paranoid stew. The Primus's ultimatum had poisoned the station's lifeblood. Every whispered conversation in the corridors could be a plot. Every sideways glance a judgment. The music had faded, replaced by a tense, waiting silence that was a terrifying echo of the Vord's own. Nyx was no longer a person. She was a bargaining chip, a plague, a fuse lit and sputtering, and the entire station was the powder keg. Bounty hunters, from augmented brutes to slick corporate assassins, began to prowl the levels above, sniffing for any trail that might lead them to the Vord's prize and the station's salvation. Silas's living sculptures, their unsettling forms now standing sentinel, were the only thing keeping them at bay. He is not merely trying to intimidate us, Silas murmured, his focus on a holographic schematic projected from his strange, multi-jointed fingers. He is conducting an experiment. He is applying a stimulus sphere and observing the reaction. He wants to see if a chaotic system will, under pressure, force itself into order. He led Nyx deeper into his studio, past the gallery of living art, through a hidden door concealed behind a curtain of weeping, bioluminescent moss. The chamber beyond was not a studio, but a laboratory, stark and clinical. In the center, suspended in a shimmering containment field, was the mangled torso of a Vord compliance officer. Wires and biometric sensors trailed from the pristine white armor, which was cracked and scorched. "There are no Vord graveyards," Silas explained, his voice low and reverent. "They are too efficient to leave their dead behind. But sometimes, in the belt, there are accidents. A micrometeoroid swarm, a plasma conduit failure. I have been collecting the pieces for decades." He gestured at the floating torso. "They are not simply human hybrids. That is a primitive assessment. They are a post-biological life form. Their cells communicate via resonant quantum entanglement. Their thoughts are not a cascade of messy electrical impulses like ours, but a perfectly harmonized chord. They exist in a state of perpetual, blissful unity with their own biology and with each other." He looked at Nyx, his ancient eyes burning with the intensity of a scholar who has finally found a peer. "The agent you used on Lacroix, it was crude, but brilliant. You did not poison him. You introduced static. You turned his symphony into a shriek. This was the Vord's weakness. Their perfection was their fragility. A system built on perfect harmony could not tolerate a single note of dissent. Their unity was a single point of failure. The agent was a one-off," Nyx said, the memory of the Primus's twitching form still vivid. "A desperate gamble. I can't replicate it on a scale that would matter." "You are thinking like a chemist," Silas chided gently. "I am a sculptor. We must sculpt a better weapon." He brought up another schematic, this one a complex, branching model of a retrovirus. "This is what I have been working on. I call it the dissonance vector. It does not attack their cells. It reprograms them. It inserts a single alien instruction into their quantum network ego. It teaches their cells to act not as a collective, but as individuals. It gives them the gift of chaos." Nyx stared at the floating code. It was a disease that weaponized the very thing she had been fighting to protect. To inflict individuality on a Vord was not to free them. It was to shatter their reality, to plunge them into a state of horrifying, singular madness. It would destroy them, she whispered. It would unmake them from the inside out. "Precisely," Silas confirmed, his voice cold. "As they intend to do to us." The problem was delivery. The Vord scout ship's shields could repel any conventional missile. Its internal systems were a closed loop, impossible to hack remotely. They needed a way to broadcast the dissonance vector directly into the ship, to make it resonate with the Vord crew's own quantum frequency. They needed an antenna. Silas turned his gaze on Nyx, and she finally understood the meaning of his words. "If you are to be the spark that starts a fire, you will need to be properly forged." "You want to put that thing inside me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Not inside you," Silas corrected, his tone softening. "As you. Your unique genetic modifications, your affinity for manipulating biological systems. You are already more adaptable than a baseline human. I can integrate a resonant amplification lattice into your nervous system. Your own bioelectric field will become the carrier wave. You will become a living broadcast, a typhoid Mary of the soul." The cost of such a procedure was unspoken but immense. It would change her forever, warp her own biological art into a weapon of terrible power. She would become a singularity, a creature of pure, weaponized chaos. She would be the noise that could shatter the great silence. While she wrestled with the horrifying proposition, a subtle change occurred in the station's atmosphere. The tense, paranoid energy began to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of lethargy, of placid acceptance. The distant argument ceased. The nervous energy of the crowds thinned out. Nyx felt it as a dull pressure behind her eyes, a gentle sanding of her own sharp edges. He started. She breathed, her silver eyes wide with alarm. "LaCroix, he's not waiting for the deadline." Silas nodded grimly, gesturing to a sensor on his console. "He has amplified the ship's pacification field and a low-level broadcast. Not enough to resequence, but enough to encourage compliance, to make turning you over seem like the most logical, peaceful solution." This was the proof they needed. This was the argument that could unite the disparate, selfish factions of Palace Grave. Compliance wasn't safety, it was just a slower, gentler form of erasure. "Get them here," Nyx said. Her decision made in an instant. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a blazing, defiant rage. Get the leaders of the guilds and the cartels. Let them feel this. Let them feel themselves being quietly put to sleep. Silas, a rare, thin smile gracing his lips, sent out the summons. The meeting took place in the main gallery, under the silent watch of Silas's living sculptures. 3 figures answered the call. The first was a woman named Kala, leader of the Myco Syndicate, her body intertwined with a network of phosphorescent fungi that pulsed with a soft, internal light. The second was Vorlog, the hulking guild master of the Ore Breakers, his skin laced with veins of polished chrome and his natural arms replaced with powerful mining claws. The third was a slender, androgynous figure known only as the Broker, head of the Chroman cartel, their face a perpetually shifting mask of holographic data. They were the power on Palace Grave biology, industry, and information, and they all looked ready to sell Nyx to the Vord. "The deal is simple." Vorlog's voice boomed, a synthesized bass that rattled the floor. "We give them the splicer, they leave. The Vord have no interest in our rock or our ore. The loss of one artist, however talented, is an acceptable price to avoid a cleansing." The broker added, their voice a smooth blend of a dozen different synthesized tones. Kala, the fungal queen, said nothing, but the agitated pulsing of the fungi on her skin betrayed her anxiety. They could all feel the pacification field, a gentle wave trying to wash away their aggression, their ambition, their very identity. "They are not offering to leave you alone," Nyx said, stepping forward. "They are offering you a choice of how you wish to be erased, quickly or slowly." She explained Silas's discovery, the nature of the pacification field, and the finality of resequencing. "He will not stop with me. Once he has proven this station can be tamed, he will tame it. Your fungi will be cataloged and sterilized. Your minds will be optimized and automated. Your information will be filtered and sanitized. The Vord do not tolerate loose ends." The leaders were silent, the logic of her words warring with the field's calming influence. They needed more than a warning. They needed to see a weapon. "Silas," Nyx said, turning to the old sculptor, "it's time." She laid down on the bio-cradle in the center of the room, the same cradle where Kalen had received his wings. The leaders watched, a mixture of suspicion and fascination, as Silas's delicate, Multi-jointed fingers went to work, guiding microscopic nanites and tailored retroviruses into her system. The process was an agony of transformation. Nyx felt her own biology being rewritten, her nervous system being hijacked by an alien architecture of resonant crystals. It felt like every cell in her body was learning a new and terrible song. She screamed, and for the first time in a long time, the sound was not one of art or rebellion, but of pure, unadulterated pain. When it was over, she rose from the cradle. She looked the same, but the air around her was different. It shimmered, distorted by a new kind of energy she was emanating. Silas released a Vord drone from a cage, a hovering white sphere that immediately tried to emit a localized pacification pulse. Nyx focused, reaching for the new power within her. The song of chaos now harmonized with her own DNA. She didn't shout, she projected. She unleashed a silent chord of pure dissonance. The drone convulsed, its anti-grav plates failed, its white shell cracked, spider webbing with black fractures. It fell to the floor, not as a broken machine, but as a pile of disordered components. Its perfect unity shattered. Silence. The three leaders stared, first at the pile of junk, then at Nyx. The pacification field pressing in on them felt weaker now, beaten back by the chaotic aura radiating from her. They were no longer looking at a fugitive. They were looking at a goddess of discord. Vorlog clenched his mining claw, the sound of grinding metal echoing in the cavern. "So," he rumbled, a dangerous grin spreading across his face, "this is how we make some noise. The alliance was forged." The deadline had passed. Through the viewport, they could see the Vord scout ship, the Tranquility, beginning to glow, its hull plates shifting as weapon ports opened like sterile, white eyes. The sterilization was about to begin. But Palace Grave was no longer a frightened, scattered flock. It was an orchestra of madmen, and it had just found its conductor. The battle for Palace Grave began not with an explosion, but with a song, as the Tranquility's weapon ports glowed with nascent energy, preparing to scour the station's surface with beams of purifying light. Every speaker, every comm unit, every holographic projector on the rock roared to life. It was a cacophony of forbidden sound, a symphony of human noise orchestrated by the Broker's information network. Bootleg battle anthems from Earth's forgotten wars clashed with the atonal shrieks of industrial music, layered over the defiant poetry of executed rebels and the raw, unfiltered wails of newborn infants. It was a sonic assault, a declaration that this place, this culture, was loud, and it would not be silenced. This was the Broker's contribution, a war of information, denial of service attack on the Vord's very philosophy. The sound wave was laced with viral data packets designed to worm their way into any Vord system foolish enough to listen, to clog their perfect logic with the messy, irrational chaos of human art. Under the cover of this auditory bombardment, the second movement began. From hidden launch bays and repurposed mining shafts all over the asteroid, a swarm of ships erupted into the void. This was Vorlog's domain. They were not warships. They were ore-breaker rigs, heavy, brutal machines plated with asteroid rock for shielding, their fronts dominated by massive, magnetically accelerated mining claws and plasma cutters. They were ugly, inefficient, and utterly terrifying. A fleet of flying iron fists. They didn't fire elegant energy beams. They hurled massive chunks of refined iron ore, dumb projectiles that the Vord's sophisticated point defense systems, designed to intercept energy signatures, initially struggled to track, and the first volley of rocks, some the size of ground cars, hammered against the Tranquility's shields, causing the pristine white vessel to shudder. The Vord ship was a rapier facing a fleet of sledgehammers. It adjusted instantly, its smaller defense turrets spitting beams of energy that vaporized the incoming projectiles. But the ore breakers were relentless. They swarmed, a chaotic cloud of metal and rock, their pilots flying with the reckless abandon of miners who navigated asteroid fields for a living. Their goal was not to destroy the Vord ship, an impossibility, but to distract it, to bloody its nose and draw its undivided attention. They were the percussion section of this mad orchestra, and they played with brutal enthusiasm, while the battle raged in the void. The third movement was unfolding in the station's shadowy depths. Kala, the Myco Syndicate leader, was conducting her own silent war into the ventilation systems, in the hydroponics bays, and in the water recycling plants. Her custom-engineered fungi were blooming. They were not weapons of destruction, but of subversion. One strain released spores that, when inhaled, induced vivid, uncontrollable hallucinations, a direct assault on the Vord's placid reality. Another, more insidious variant was a biological saboteur, a fast-growing mold that consumed the specific polymer composites used in Vord technology. Her spores were invisible, carried on the air currents, a silent, creeping counterattack aimed at the Vord's internal systems. Should they ever attempt to board the station, she was turning the very environment of Palacegrave into a weapon. And at the heart of it all was Nyx. She stood on the station's highest observation deck, a transparent dome of armored plasteel that offered a terrifying, godlike view of the battle. Silas stood beside her, his ancient eyes reflecting the distant, silent flashes of plasma and kinetic impacts. She was connected now, not just to the dissonance vector integrated into her nervous system, but to the station itself. The broker had jury-rigged an interface, linking her to the main comms antenna. She was no longer just a broadcast. She was a sniper. The Orebreaker fleet was a beautiful, chaotic distraction, but they were taking losses. Vord energy beams, precise and deadly, were slicing through the clumsy mining ships, turning them into blossoming fireballs. They were buying her time with their lives. "Their shield is modulating," Silas said, his gaze fixed on the shimmering energy field around the Tranquility. "It has to, in order to allow their own weapons to fire. There are microsecond gaps in its integrity. That is your window." Nyx closed her eyes, shutting out the visual chaos of the battle. She had to feel it. She reached out with her new sense, the resonant hum of her own biology now tuned to a predator's frequency. The Vord ship was a beacon of perfect harmony in the void. Its crew, the Primus included, were a single, unified consciousness, a single, perfect target. She focused on that harmony, searching for the discordant note of a shield gap. It was like trying to hear a pin drop in a hurricane. She felt the lives of the Orebreaker pilots winking out, their brief, noisy existences extinguished by the Vord's silent efficiency. Rage gave her focus. Rage gave her clarity. There, a flicker, a momentary drop in the shield's resonant frequency as a primary weapon capacitor discharged. It was a window of opportunity that existed for less time than a human heartbeat. She didn't hesitate. She gathered all the chaotic energy she now embodied, the full, terrible power of the dissonance vector, and hurled it through the antenna, across the void, and into that fleeting gap. It was a silent scream of pure, weaponized ego. For a moment, nothing happened. The battle raged on. The Orebreakers continued their suicidal dance. The Tranquility continued its methodical destruction. Nyx slumped against the console, the effort leaving her drained and trembling. "Did it work?" she asked, her voice a ragged whisper. Silas stared out at the Vord ship, his expression unreadable. "Wait," he breathed. The change was subtle at first. A Vord defense turret, tracking an orebreaker rig, suddenly swiveled and fired on another turret on its own ship, on the bridge of the Tranquility. A maintenance drone suddenly extended its cutting torch and began methodically dismantling a critical power conduit. Inside the ship, the crew felt the vector as a psychic invasion. The perfect but harmonious chord of their shared consciousness was shattered by a million new, selfish voices. The cell in the Primus's hand, once a willing part of the whole, suddenly screamed for its own survival. The synapse in a navigator's brain, once a node in a perfect network, decided it wanted to dream of electric sheep. Unity dissolved into a bedlam of individual desires. The ship, a seamless extension of its crew's will, was now being piloted by a committee of madmen. Primus Lacroix experienced it as a personal violation. The concept of I slammed into his consciousness like a physical blow. For the first time, he felt fear, not the logical assessment of a threat, but the raw, primal terror of a singular entity facing its own extinction. He felt alone. His perfect body, once a silent and obedient vessel, was now a prison of warring impulses. His right hand tried to stabilize the ship's power core, while his left hand tried to claw out his own eyes to stop seeing the horrifying chaos unfolding on his bridge. The Tranquility began to convulse. Its movements became erratic, its elegant lines spasming as internal systems fought against each other. It fired its main cannon, not at the station, but at a random, empty patch of space. The Orebreaker fleet, sensing the shift, pulled back, their pilots watching in stunned disbelief as the perfect predator began to eat itself alive. It was a slow, agonizing death. The ship's internal life support systems, now acting on their own selfish whims, began to fight over atmospheric resources, pumping pure nitrogen into one section and venting oxygen from another. The elegant gravity plating fluctuated wildly, sending crew members slamming into ceilings and floors. The ship was dying not from external damage, but from a terminal case of individuality. Nyx watched, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. This was her art now. This terrible, beautiful destruction. She had given them the gift of the human condition: fear, ambition, selfishness, chaos, and it had utterly destroyed them. The final act came when the ship's engine core, no longer regulated by a unified will, breached containment. There was no grand explosion. The Vord were too efficient, even in their self-destruction. The ship simply vanished. It imploded, collapsing in on itself in a silent, violent flash of white light, pulling a chunk of the void with it. Then, there was only darkness, dotted with the running lights of the remaining Orebreaker ships. Silence returned to the void around Palace Grave, but this was a different kind of silence. It was not the oppressive, placid quiet of the Vord. It was the quiet of aftermath, the silence of awe and of horror. The comms crackled to life, and a single voice, Vorlog's synthesized boom, echoed across the station. "Noise wins, Vrzal," he said. A ragged as joyous cheer erupted from 1,000 throats at once. They had done the impossible. They had killed a god. But as the celebration began, Nyx felt no triumph. She looked at her hands, at the faint, chaotic aura still shimmering around them. She had saved them, but she had become a monster to do it. The dissonance vector was a part of her now. She was a weapon that could never be sheathed, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that this was only the first battle. The Vord were a vast, galaxy-spanning consciousness, They had lost a single ship, a single Primus. When they learned what had happened here, when they learned of the disease of self, they would not send another scout. They would send an army. They would come to sterilize the infection and its source. They would come for her. The noise had won the battle, but the war for silence had just begun. The victory celebration on Palace Grave was a glorious, frantic supernova of noise, but like all such explosions, it quickly faded, leaving behind a cold, expanding quiet. In the days that followed, the weight of what they had done and what was to come settled over the station like a shroud. The leaders of the newfound Shatterbelt Alliance met in Silas's gallery, the living sculptures their silent witnesses. The initial euphoria had been replaced by the grim pragmatism of survivors. Vorlog, the guildmaster, argued for converting their entire mining fleet into warships, for plating the station in a kilometer of iron. Kala, the fungal queen, proposed a more insidious defense, seeding the entire asteroid field with her Vord-devouring spores, creating a biological minefield that would make the system impassable. It was the broker who finally silenced them, their holographic face a calm mask of cascading data streams. "Your plans are admirable," they said, their synthesized voice devoid of emotion. "They are also futile. You are planning for a siege. The Vord do not lay siege to infections. They cauterize them." A star chart shimmered into existence above the meeting table. A single red icon marked their location. Then, from the direction of the Galactic core, 1,000 more icons began to appear. A spreading stain of white light. This is the Vord's response, called from deep space listening posts. It is not a fleet. It is an extermination wave. They are not coming to fight us. They are coming to erase the entire sector from existence. A heavy silence filled the cavern. Vorlag's chrome-laced fists clenched. Kala's fungal network pulsed with a distressed dramatically yellow light. They had won a battle, only to discover it had guaranteed their annihilation in the war. It was Silas who spoke, his voice a dry rustle of old paper. "You cannot build a wall high enough to stop the tide. You must find the source of the flood." All eyes turned to Nyx, who had been standing apart from the others, a solitary figure wrapped in a shimmering aura of chaotic energy. In the wake of her transformation, she had become a pariah. The people of Palace Grave, the very noisemakers she had saved, now gave her a wide berth, their gazes a mixture of awe and terror. They looked at her and saw not a savior, but a living apocalypse. She was the embodiment of the weapon that had saved them, and no one is ever truly comfortable in the presence of a loaded gun. "There is a central consciousness," Silas continued, his gaze fixed on Nyx, "a prime unity. Son, the Vord are not a true collective. They are a hierarchy. What you shattered on the Tranquility was a local network, an echo of the true voice. To stop the wave, you must silence the singer." The broker's holographic face flickered. "The data fragments we recovered from the Vord scout ship's final moments confirm this theory. They contain references to a nexus point, a command and control hub they call the Chorus. Its location is heavily encrypted, but there are patterns, a path of sorts. The plan was insane. A single desperate scalpel strike against the heart of a god. They would not wait for the Vord armada. They would take the fight to them. They would assemble a single ship, a ghost vessel, designed not for combat, but for infiltration. Vorlog's ore breakers would provide the hull, forged from radar-absorbent asteroid alloys. Kala would cultivate a biological stealth system, a living chrysalis of spores that would bloom on the ship's exterior, mimicking the energy signature of the void itself. The broker would provide the impossible navigation, piecing together the Vord's encrypted star charts, And Nyx. Nyx would be the warhead. The journey to the chorus was a long, silent pilgrimage through the heart of Vord-controlled space. Their ship, christened the Echo, was a sliver of darkness sliding through a galaxy of pristine, silent light. They passed entire solar systems that had been pacified, their planets glowing with a soft, uniform luminescence, their orbits swept clean of all chaotic debris. They saw Vord citadels hanging in the void, structures of such impossible geometry and scale that they seemed to be thoughts given form. It was a universe of breathtaking, suffocating order. Nyx spent most of the voyage in a meditative trance, communing with the terrible power coiled within her. Silas was her only companion, the old sculptor acting as her keeper, her confessor, and her anchor to the humanity she felt slipping away. He taught her to control the dissonance vector, to shape it, to focus its chaotic energy into a single, precise point rather than an indiscriminate blast. "You are not a bomb, child," he would tell her, his strange, delicate fingers adjusting a biomonitor connected to her temple. "You are a tuning fork. You must find their key, and then sing a note so perfectly wrong that it shatters the crystal." As they drew closer to their destination, the nature of the Vord's unity became terrifyingly clear. It was a psychic presence that pressed in on the ship, a constant, low hum on the edge of perception. It was the feeling of being watched, not by eyes, but by the very fabric of space-time. The chorus was not a planet or a station. It was a star, or rather, what had once been a star. The Vord had encased it in a latticework of crystalline structures and biomechanical filaments, a cage of perfect order that harnessed the star's entire energy output. It was a Dyson sphere, but one built by jewelers and logicians, its surface a shimmering, silent testament to a power beyond human comprehension. This was the Vord's mind, their god, their central server, and floating in the silent space around it were not thousands of warships, but millions. The extermination wave had not yet departed. It was waiting, in perfect formation, a silent congregation awaiting the command to begin their holy work. "There is no way to get you close enough to broadcast." The broker's voice crackled over the comm, the signal struggling against the immense psychic pressure, the interference from the star itself, the sheer density of their unified consciousness. "Your signal would be a whisper in a hurricane." Nyx looked at Silas, her silver eyes calm. They had both known this moment was coming. The scalpel strike had to be made from within. "This ship has one other feature," Silas said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Its cockpit can be repurposed. As a delivery system, a single load, high-velocity projectile." He did not need to finish. To infect the chorus. She could not simply broadcast at it. She had to become part of it. The dissonance vector had to be injected directly into the heart of the Vord's god mind. It was a suicide run. The psychic backlash from a billion minds screaming in the agony of sudden self-awareness would annihilate her. There were no grand speeches, no tearful goodbyes. Vorlog, Kala, and the broker watched on a remote feed from Palace Grave, their faces grim masks of respect. On the bridge of the Echo, Nyx strapped herself into the pilot's chair. Silas stood beside her. "You were an artist," he said, his voice thick with a strange but eternal pride. "This will be your masterpiece. A sculpture carved not from flesh, but from the soul of an entire species." "I was a gene splicer," Nyx corrected, a faint smile touching her lips. "I just wanted to make things beautiful, to give a man wings." She thought of Kalen, the freighter pilot, and hoped he was somewhere safe, feeling the pull of his magnificent, useless wings against his back. It was the most human thought she'd had in a long time. She initiated the launch sequence. The cockpit separated from the body of the Echo with a jolt, its engines firing in a brutal, silent burst of acceleration. She was the bullet. The Vord fleet, so vast and powerful, did not even register her. She was an anomaly too small, too fast, a single errant thought in a perfect mind. Her plasteel canopy showed her the approaching surface of the chorus, a landscape of impossible, crystalline structures and rivers of pure energy. She closed her eyes. She did not brace for the physical impact. She prepared for the psychic one. She let go of her control, her focus, and unleashed the full bay, untamed power of the dissonance vector. She became the noise. The moment she hit, the universe broke. She was no longer Nyx. She was a torrent of pure chaos pouring into an ocean of pure order. She felt the Vord's collective consciousness, an entity ancient and vast, turn its full attention to her. It was not angry. It was curious. It examined the alien concept of I that she had introduced. And in that final, terrifying moment of connection, she did not just inject them with a disease. She gave them a gift. She flooded their perfect, sterile unity with everything. She was the memory of Martian sunlight, the smell of Alara's crushed flowers, the terror of the resequencing clinics, the defiant joy of Palace Grave's music, the agony of her transformation, the quiet dignity of Silas's art. She showed them the sublime, terrible beauty of a single, flawed individual life. And then the first Vord screamed, "Orchestra news!" It was a sound that echoed not through space, but through the soul. The great silence was shattered, replaced by the sound of a billion new voices, all crying out in the terror and wonder of their own birth. The Vord Armada, the perfect instrument of extermination, faltered. A million ships, once a single entity, were now piloted by a million new individuals. Some fled in terror, some turned on each other in confusion, some simply drifted, their pilots catatonic, lost in the overwhelming new reality of being alone. The Vord Empire died in a single silent instant, not with a bang, but with a thought. On the bridge of the drifting husk of the Echo, Silas watched the light of the chorus flicker and change, its perfect symmetry fracturing. He looked at the empty pilot's chair where his greatest student, his finest work of art, had once sat. He had expected to feel triumph or grief. Instead, he felt a profound sense of peace. The war was over. Humanity was safe. The galaxy was no longer silent. It was now filled with the chaotic, terrifying, and beautiful noise of life, a masterpiece of cosmic dissonance that would echo for eternity.